Hello, everyone, and welcome. We have returned. It is yet another Monolith Soft ranking video. It's kind of gotten out of hand, honestly. I probably need to just take this off the tier list playlist and put it on its own tier list playlist. But there's just been a lot of Monolith Soft activity from me, and also Monolith Soft activity in general. So we gotta address things. We got a thing that's going to happen. I'm going to say first and foremost, before we get too deep into this, I still haven't really addressed the camera issue with this computer, and because I don't stream anymore, it hasn't really been as big of a deal for me to fix. So I might flicker out here and there, sorry. But what's important is you hear my voice, because today we're going to be doing 3 things, actually. So if you are in the realm of the Xenoblade, fandom, Xeno fandom, Monolith Soft fandom, wherever you land, Disaster Day of Crisis fan, no new updates for you guys. Sorry, I'm keeping an eye out. But the Xenoblade Chronicles 3 DLC came out, Future Redeemed. And if you don't know, and this is maybe, it's kind of hard to say how fair this is to individual titles, but like, I think Xenoblade Chronicles 2, Torn of the Golden Country, which is kind of its own DLC, but it also had its own physical soul with it, kind of set a standard of like, hey, this is going to be, in some ways, its own like mini RPG stacked on top of Xenoblade Chronicles 2. And in a lot of ways, it's kind of its own experience. And I think Future Redeemed gets there generally, but there's no separate physical product for it. And there might be like different evaluations people might feel based off, how Future Redeemed lands, as it is not sold as a separate package product. I'm basically considering it its kind of own little mini RPG thing, as I am doing with Torna. So we're going to be ranking that today. I played through all of it. Haven't made any real videos about it, but I did talk about it on a podcast, so if you want to go listen to that there, you can do that there. I might break it out into its own like little podcast highlight thing or something as well. We're going to do 2 other things as well today. One is resolve an ongoing issue with this list, where at the end of every time I talk about this list, I'm like, I need to rank Future Connected, the Xenoblade Chronicles 1 add-on DLC standalone thing, however you want to put it. Monolith Soft does not list this as its own game on their website, so this is my own personal decision to consider it its own full video game. But we're going to be ranking that because that's something that I've continued to forget to do. And then also, if you have not been in tune with like what's been going on with me lately, I went and rewatched a bunch of Xenosaga cutscenes, all Xenosaga 1, 2, and 3. This is a big deal because if you have watched the previous lists, which I recommend you should if you want to know how we ended up on the list today, I had very, I would say maybe, I don't know if skewed is the right word, but my memory of Xenosaga's story was not particularly was not good. And there's a lot of ways that affected how I perceived most of the Xenosaga games. So we need to do a little shuffling here today. I'll probably talk a little bit about like what my thoughts were off that. I did not replay these video games. I do think there would still be value in me playing these games and seeing them as one package kind of thing. But at the very least, I can resolve some of the story issues this list has had in the past when it comes to Xenosaga specifically. All right? So we're going to do that today. So those are the 3 things we're going to do. I don't know how long it's going to take. I said when we ranked Somabringer, I'd be like, oh, maybe a little short thing. And it was like 40 minutes. So hopefully it's not too bad. And the fact of the matter is, like, a lot of these things are like connected to other games. So there's a good chance that, we'll kind of end up not having to talk about them nearly as much, maybe. So, but first and foremost, let's go ahead and, start with the last thing I said, which is kind of revisiting the Xenosaga games. In my opinion, Xenosaga Episode 2 still sits on the A list here. But in rewatching the cutscenes for Xenosaga 2, I think for me, if I were to sit down and replay this game, I would be putting it in consideration for S tier. I do really like the story that Xenosaga Episode 2 tells. I think, especially in the context of what happens in Xenosaga 1, 2 does a really good job of, in a lot of ways, getting that story, I think, kicked off and going. I know a lot of people don't care. There's a lot of drama around Xenosaga 2. You know, it's not exactly the vision of what the original writers had or whatever, but I think Xenosaga 2 does a good job of kind of kicking that game in gear and getting things going. And there's this weird like time skip in the middle and things like that, but ultimately, as much as the time skip is there, I don't know. Part of me doesn't really blame it for having that time skip that much. I don't know. I think there's room to discuss Xenosaga Episode 2 going to S tier potentially in the future. Today, I'm going to leave it at A tier just because I feel like there might be some pacing issues with that game based off like what I was reading online from my and like I don't remember there being pacing issues per se beyond the game just kind of being short in general, but I'm actually kind of cool with that these days of like short RPGs in a lot of ways. So we're not moving Xenosaga Episode 2. We're going to leave that there. Xenosaga Episode 1. Here's where things do not look so good. So Xenosaga Episode 1, ton of respect for that game from a gameplay perspective. Maybe not as good as other Monolith Soft games from a combat perspective, but I think it does a good job, especially as like a first game from the company post Xenogears. And it really kind of, I think in a lot of ways, establishes what the Monolith Soft combat system is like going to be. It does not necessarily get there and get all the pieces, but I think it like starts setting a lot of those values in place, in my opinion. I'm still cool with that. I have not played through it though, I will say, so there's an opportunity there if I replay it that we will be able to move it around based off that. Story-wise though, so I think I made a lot of assumptions in the past about what Xenosaga 1 meant to me story-wise. And in rewatching it, I have a lot of major problems with Xenosaga 1 story-wise. I think Xenosaga 1 does not have a lot of substance to it. It feels like a game that is taking way too much time. Now, it is good to note, Xenosaga Episode 1, was at a time when, at least as far as people seem to understand, it seems like at least 4 or 5, maybe 6 games were planned in the Xenosaga franchise, right? And so it kind of had the luxury to take its time. If you go look, it's like they didn't even quite get to where they wanted to be with the story in Xenosaga 1 and stuff like that. So there's a lot of things going on. But I think Xenosaga 1 does something that actually really frustrates me. And that it does, and like I've been thinking a lot about this because of Future Redeemed, which we'll talk about later, but like it does a lot of things where it seems like its target audience is people who already played through the rest of the Xenosaga games. And the reason I say that is because there's a lot of like kind of dead-end conversations in Xenosaga where they will do something where they're like, what if he shows up kind of thing, right? And then, do you remember 15 years ago kind of thing? Like, it does a lot of stuff like that. And I think that stuff is fine generally if you deliver upon it within a short period of time. And like, they do get into some details like, 15 years ago, Milsha disappeared or something like that, right? I don't remember exactly what happened, but there's a lot of like these threads. There's a lot of organization names. There's like, Abel's Arc and like the credits. But in these moments where they show those things to you, in my opinion, they hold little to no value. I think they hold value if you know what's going to be happening in the Xenosaga franchise, and maybe as a Xenogears fan who has previous experience with Xenogears, you might be able to see those things a little bit earlier. But I feel like if you're coming in fresh, you're going to sit there and be like, okay, like which of these, there's a bunch of names going off. They don't explain many of them. There's a bunch of events going off. You don't know what's going to be important and what's not going to be important. Well, it's going to be important, but like you don't really know what the details are. And like they don't give you enough information that I think it sticks in your head. It's easy to just kind of let things go. And those things don't really seem to matter until you get to Xenosaga Episode 2, in my opinion. So, personally, there's a lot of, I think, dislike that I pointed towards Xenosaga Episode 3 specifically in terms of storytelling. That really actually is from Xenosaga Episode 1. And in my opinion, Xenosaga Episode 1 is maybe the weakest of that trilogy story-wise. Which, as an introduction to any game, there is a lot of weakness that typically happens, especially, given the fact that Xenosaga takes its sweet time with a lot of stuff at the beginning. But I just feel like they don't do a good job of setting a basis to make you care. There are some cool story beats. I forget his name, not Margulis. The guy who's like the military leader guy. I forget what his name is. He gets like the cross on his head or whatever. He's a good story. It's an interesting story, like to my assumption, basically about somebody who goes through essentially a prison system multiple times and then just like never gets reformed and just like comes out every time worse and worse and worse until he's like literally just killing people, right? I mean, I think he starts by killing people, but anyways, so like he has a good story there. I don't think any of the main cast really has a strong story there. Again, they're treating this game like as an early part of the plot, so I get it, I understand, but I think that just makes it so this game really doesn't stand on its own in any real way. So in saying that, I guess the question is, does it move? And I thought maybe it would move more, but in hindsight, I think I never really thought that much about Xenosaga Episode 1 story-wise, so like maybe because I have no real praise for Xenosaga Episode 1 story, I don't necessarily feel like it's a huge hit to like how I felt about Xenosaga Episode 1. But I do feel immensely more negative about its story for Episode 1. Disaster Day of Crisis is always a hard conversation, so let's just hold that and just let that be there, and let's talk about Xenoblade Chronicles 3. What was the problem with Xenoblade Chronicles 3? It's disappointing in its combat system. Story-wise, I think story-wise, there's a lot of great things about Xenoblade Chronicles 3. Combat system was a big bummer, though. And world design. Combat system and world design. I think combat in Xenosaga Episode 1 is cool. Maybe if you compared them side to side, it wouldn't like hold up as well. And I think my memory is that I really like the dungeon design in Xenosaga games and Baten Kaito's games. And I really personally just miss that kind of design in a lot of games in general. That doesn't necessarily mean that it's the better way to do it. I just kind of wish we had a little bit more variety, I think. I think there would be a good argument that the Xeno franchise as a whole would be better off by doing a mix of dungeons and overworlds, in my opinion. But, that's a whole other conversation. Let me ask the question of Xenogears next. Do I still like Xenosaga better than Xenogears? Xenogears as a video game on this list is the most nothing video game to me at this point in time. It's been a long time. I could feel better about it if I went back. I did not rewatch any of the story for Xenogears. I do think the one difference I had is that I think Xenogears, despite its pacing issues at the end, generally feels like a complete plot, right? They show that episode 5 at the end, whatever, but it's generally a complete plot, right? And I think like gameplay and pacing until the second disc. The second disc is really rough. I think that like the weird thing is like to talk about Xenogears versus like Xenosaga Episode 2 with like the time skip stuff and things like that. Xenosaga Episode 2, it doesn't feel like there's like a big gap in gameplay. I feel like the gameplay feels like they kind of, yes, the story wise they shuffle you off, but I think gameplay wise they kind of just put you to the next spot you need to be. Where I feel like Xenogears, it's weird because they're like warping you around between dungeons and boss fights, and you have like almost no context for what's happening beyond like a few little blurbs of text. And so I think in general I prefer how Xenosaga 2 handled it, where it just sums up a bunch of events and then just kind of puts you again at the next story point where like we're going to tell this story kind of thing. So I guess pacing-wise, Xenogears is a game I still have a problem with. I like Xenosaga better than Xenogears still. Xenoblade Chronicles 3 then. I guess we gotta make this decision. Do I prefer Xenoblade Chronicles 3 over Xenosaga? I think this really comes down to just like, do I appreciate what Xenosaga laid the foundation for from a gameplay perspective? And I do. But do I appreciate that more than just the better execution of Xenoblade Chronicles 3 as a whole? And I think story-wise, Xenoblade Chronicles 3 does a lot of things right. I think I disagree with a lot of people that I think Xenoblade Chronicles 3 story is very well done overall. And Xenosaga is really dang rough in that department. Like, really rough, episode 1. Let me put it there and see how I feel. Does that feel good? That feels good to me. I think Xenosaga is getting demoted. About a mid-tier C game. I think I like it better than Xenogears, at least right now. I think that could change depending on if I revisit Xenogears and have better fleshed out opinions on it. But at this time, my memory of Xenogears is very similar to like a Super Mario Bros. 3 situation where it kind of didn't really speak to me in any way, I guess. And so it was like one of the most like kind of mundane experiences I had in a long time. I read my review for Xenogears and it like was unfortunately not very opinionated. It was very matter of fact stuff. But I feel like that was like my problem with games that I usually didn't care about back then, is I just did write a lot of very matter of the fact opinion kind of reviews. So I feel good about that. We can always move if we need to, but I think that's what we're doing. The other thing is, so if you're mad at me about what happened in Xenosaga Episode 1 there, we got some business to take care of with Xenosaga Episode 3. Xenosaga Episode 3. Story or gameplay-wise, I think, as far as I can tell, is still kind of whatever. I revisited it when I did Xenosaga or Xenoblade Chronicles 3. Still did not love the story. Or the gameplay. Story-wise, though. Story-wise. I think I placed a lot of hate on this game story-wise for a lot of reasons. Again, I think a lot of that was misguided. I think my dislike for a lot of Episode 1 and what that game did is where I pointed my dislike at Xenosaga Episode 3. I feel way more positive about Xenosaga Episode 3's story. I think it's a good story overall. I think given the circumstances of them having to bundle all that story into one, initially I thought it was all rushed, but generally I feel like it actually was pretty well delivered. Admittedly, again, I did not play this game. I did play it a long time ago, but I did not revisit playing it. I just watched the cutscenes, but I feel way better about the cutscenes. Ending-wise, my memory of the ending was completely whack and off. I don't know what was up. Like, I had really weird hatred for Chaos and, like, Mary Magdalene stuff with Cosmos. So, like, I don't know why that was the case, because it seemed pretty straightforward. I don't know. The religion stuff, I think, in Xenosaga is something that I was There's a lot of reasons why I didn't like the religion stuff, and I don't think I'm necessarily going to talk about that today. But I think nowadays I kind of understand why I was frustrated by that. I think largely it's due to like the gaps that Xenosaga Episode 1 left, I think. And so what do you fill that with? Religion stuff. Someone recently made a joke to me like, oh, you need to hand out a Bible at a convention if you talk about Xeno. And I'm like, oh my gosh, no. Anyways, so I can feel pretty confident to say we are deleting F tier off this list. I don't think F tier needs to exist. I don't know how to do this. There we go. Delete row. So we have removed F tier from this list. So I can feel pretty confident about that first and foremost. I guess the question is, like, where does Xenosaga go now? Episode 3. It's going to be a tough one because I still have I do not like the gameplay aspect of Xenosaga Episode 3. I know that much from what I revisited recently. Again, did not play the whole thing, just from what I revisited and played a little bit of. I think I feel pretty confident in saying I prefer it over Project Cross Zone. There's a lot of things gameplay-wise that feel good on paper in Project Cross Zone, I think, but don't actually make me happy. Do I like it better than Xenogears? I think I like it better than Xenogears. Sea's so crowded, baby. Xenogears, I think if Xenogears had a stronger combat system, there's interesting things about Xenogears' combat system, but not in the way that I think Monolith Soft combat systems are interesting. It's more of just like what if we made an entire game based around Sabin and Final Fantasy 6 is kind of what it feels like. I'm not saying it's 100% accurate, but I think you get where I'm coming from with that at the very least, if you know. I probably should put this over here so I am looking at the screen here with you guys rather than looking off to the side. Sorry about my distant eyes this whole time. Is it better than Xenosaga Episode 1? It's still, again, I think the combat in Xenosaga Episode 1 is pretty solid. I think story-wise, it's significantly better. I like Alan. So, we talked about this before. I did not like Xion very much. I think at the end of the day, I still did not like Xion very much. However, I think Xion is a good character, And I think Xion is a very realistic character in a way that a lot of video game protagonists are not realistic. And I think there's a lot of praise to be given because of that. So while I would not want to be friends with Xion personally, I don't think that necessarily means that I have problems with Xion as a character anymore. God, that combat system in Xenosaga Episode 3 is so boring, though. I guess the question is, like, what hatred outweighs what more? Do I hate the Xenosaga? Like, I do not like Xenosaga Episode 1 story. I very much do not like it. I do not like Xenosaga Episode 3 story, or gameplay. Do not like it. Story, pretty dang good, Xenosaga Episode 3. Gameplay in Xenosaga Episode 1, pretty alright good. And then I think Xenosaga Episode 1 gets a little bit of a tilt of just being a first Monolith Soft game and establishing some of the things that I think Monolith Soft games are kind of known for today from a gameplay perspective. For me personally, I think you guys know if you've been following the series, I value a lot more than story and anything else. I value Monolith Soft's gameplay over everything else. So story is like kind of secondary for me in a lot of ways. But I think the weird push and pull is that like Xenosaga Episode 1 is just like gameplay wise is not the game that I love in that regard. I feel pretty confident it does not get above Xenoblade Chronicles 3. Xenoblade Chronicles 3 I think is generally overall better. That story, man. That story in Episode 1. I will say this. And maybe this is bias because I just rewatched all the cutscenes. So I kind of got what I needed out of Xenosaga Episode 3, right? If I want to go back and replay one of those games, I absolutely would want to play Episode 1 over Episode 3. Personally. That just seems like what I would prefer to do. We're going to leave it there. It's out of the F tier at the very least. Maybe not as high as I thought it was going to go. I thought maybe it would get higher, closer to like the high C tier. Didn't quite get where I thought it was going to go, unfortunately. But, I come into these things without strong plans. But I think in some ways it's kind of more interesting because like, you never know. Sometimes Xenosaga Episode 2 ends up at the top of your A rank. So, all right. So there's our Xenosaga revisionist history ranking chart there. I feel pretty good about that. We had some trades. I think ultimately maybe Xenosaga as a franchise did not improve its listing on this list very much. But Xenosaga Episode 3 definitely redeemed itself in some ways, I think. So a little worried with how crowded C is getting, but we can always move it in the future. All right. Let's go to Future Connected. So I'm going to be honest with you. Been a long time since I've looked at Future Connected as well. I played this when it came out. If you do not know, Future Connected was a extra bit of content in the Xenoblade Chronicles Definitive Edition for the Switch. It is not separate DLC. It was included in the pack. You cannot buy it separately. It is a part of that experience. Unlike Xenoblade Chronicles 2, Torn of the Golden Country, this game is A, much shorter, about half the length if I remember correctly, and then B, it is incredibly built on top of the Xenoblade Chronicles 1 format, where Xenoblade Chronicles 2, Torn of the Golden Country made some pretty significant changes to the game itself, and as you can see, launched it to the S tier on our list here versus the A tier that ended up with Xenoblade Chronicles 2. So what I really valued in Xenoblade Chronicles Future Connected, personally, as somebody who had not played Xenoblade Chronicles in a long time, I thought it was a great refresher piece. What makes Xenoblade Chronicles 1 great? And I think this works in a lot of ways. One, from a gameplay perspective, is just like a nice 10-hour thing where you revisit the combat of Xenoblade Chronicles. Melia is a character that I think if you play Xenoblade Chronicles 1 casually, you may not play her too deeply because she's a character that feels kind of hard to use. And if you don't know, Xenoblade Chronicles 1 has a lot of different character classes and things like that. And so characters like Shulk, Rein, Sharla, things like that, are much more accessible to use. So to make Melia kind of the central to this this game, I think as a player, at least, I felt encouraged to give Melia's combat system my all. And I really felt like I was able to utilize it here full. She's a really interesting character in that way. It's not changed really much from the base Xenoblade Chronicles, so there's not like anything new here per se, but I do like the focus on her and how it seems like they're kind of trying to push you to utilize her combat system specifically. And again, I think a lot of people probably skipped out on Melia's combat system in a lot of ways. So I was really happy with that, and Melia's combat system is great. Basically, if you don't know, she summons like these spirits behind her, and each of these spirits are different elements, and when you use them, they go and attack enemies, but when they're behind you, they give you buffs, and they kind of layer a bit. So you kind of layer them on. So if you want like a ether magic buff up, you put that as like your low level spell, and then as you like build on top, like the highest level spell, I believe this is the right order, but the highest level spell shoots off first. So you kind of like keep the spell you want to shoot at the top of the list, and then the spells you want to use as buffs at the bottom of the list. It's a pretty cool system. She also can be a healer as well, which is kind of neat, although there is a formal healer in this game. They have two Nopon that are like Sharla and Ryan, essentially, even though Shulk and Melia are like the only real characters that kind of show up from that previous game. Don't remember much about the Nopons themselves, honestly. I do remember thinking they were all right. The area in this game is actually a reused area that was not in the final release for Xenoblade Chronicles 1, or not as a gameplay thing you could play. Instead, it was a area that was cut, which is called the, I think it's called the Bionis Shoulder, if I recall correctly. It's an interesting area because it is one of the biggest areas in all of the Xenoblade games. And it very much feels like a Xenoblade Chronicles 1 area where there's a lot of empty space, but I think they do a really good job of, spacing out content in interesting ways throughout that area. So I think that's cool. Story-wise, I do think it's a little weak. I don't remember there being a lot going on beyond introducing the concept of fog beasts, which is related to Xenoblade Chronicles 3. I don't remember if Xenoblade Chronicles 3, the base game, had fog beasts in it or not, but essentially, like, to my understanding, go read the wiki if you're like, that sounds wrong. But, like, to my understanding, the fog beasts are essentially beasts that kind of are coming between the different worlds, between Xenoblade Chronicles 1 and 2 in some ways. And 3, it kind of bleeds over to that, I guess, in some ways. That's my understanding. I could be wrong. I don't think the finer details of that really matter that much, honestly. I think the bigger thing is just them kind of introducing the idea of rifts in the universe, and Shulk kind of being aware of that, and Melia and Shulk being aware of that, to kind of lead into what's going on with Xenoblade Chronicles 3 specifically. I do like one of the villains of this game. He's one of the High-Entia that, I don't know if he's a High-Entia specifically, one of the guys with the wing. I don't know if they're all called High-Entia or if it's just certain ones called High-Entia, but he's got the wing head thing. He's kind of just like a very generic villain, where he's kind of like the kind of like happy servant to serve Melia kind of thing, but actually has a thing that he wants to just kill her kind of thing. So it is a very tropey kind of boss, and it just kind of happens to be that I like that type of character, so I do like him a lot. I do not remember his name. There's some weird stuff I remember, like, where you kind of resolve the story with him, but he doesn't die in that moment. But then later, there's like a cutscene where like falls off a cliff or something. It's really weird from what I remember at the very least. So it doesn't make a lot of sense. So yeah, I don't know. Future Connected's a very strange little piece of content. There's things I respect about it. It doesn't really stand super well on its own. I don't think it's something that really people need to go and play, honestly. But I do think it's like a solid piece of content. And there's like some fun things about it. So I feel pretty good. It's not going to be in the D tier. Gosh, do I feel... Let me skip C. I'm just scared. C just feels so busy. B tier. Does it feel like it would fit in B tier at all for me? I don't necessarily think so. Definitely wouldn't put it... Well, Baten Kaitos Origins has a really cool combat system that's like really different from the base Baten Kaitos. So I feel pretty good at being below that. Xenoblade Chronicles X has a lot of great stuff going on with the overworld. Easy. Super Robot Tyson OG Saga Endless Frontier. Combat system in that game is great. Characters are great. There's a lot of great things about Super Robot Tyson OG Saga Endless Frontier. Bringer is a little bit of a toughie because there's a lot of story things I like about Bringer. Gameplay wise, I'm gonna move this over here. I just want to rest my finger and not have to hold it. This is not where Xenoblade Chronicles Future Connected is going right now. Gameplay wise, I think Future Connected is a better experience. However, it is very much just Xenoblade Chronicles 1 gameplay wise. Story wise, though, I very much prefer what's going on in Bringer story wise. I think Bringer is like a very uniquely potent game to me when it comes to story, especially after watching the Xenosaga story stuff. I think I'm going to kind of get into that in a video in the future, so hopefully you see that. If not, I'm not going to talk about it right now. I don't want to sit here and just like splurge about that whole thing. I do very much love the cast of Bringer. I think there's a lot of great things story-wise about Bringer. I think from a company perspective, there's a lot of awesome things about Bringer as well. And I just think the combat is Bringer's really biggest challenge there. But Xenoblade Chronicles Future Connected's combat system is not something I particularly hold in high regard. I think it's like a nice little like taste of like, oh, a little bit of that Xeno film. As somebody who did not replay Definitive Edition and just bought it for Future Connected, I think it felt pretty good for that. Just like, I just want to see what this game looks like in nice graphics and what quality of life changes they made. And also, here's some bonus content stuff, right? We're going to move down to C. I want to see what we're feeling. Oh my God, Disaster Crisis. Again, we're just like, Disaster Crisis is always a hard conversation, so let's just skip past that for now. I do worry that means Disaster Crisis will stay where it is more than other games because I'm just scared to talk about it. It's just such a hard comparison to make. So I think it's so much easier to just talk about these games below it, and then like if we get up here, talk about Disaster Crisis. Xenoblade Chronicles 3. Does it feel better than Xenoblade Chronicles 3? Story-wise, I really like what's going on in Xenoblade Chronicles 3. Gameplay-wise, in a lot of ways, I respect what Xenoblade Chronicles 3 is doing gameplay-wise more. Easy enough. I think that's easy. It's moving it down the list. Xenoblade Chronicles Future Connected versus Xenosaga Episode 1. I think I feel pretty good about putting it above that. There's a lot of things about Xenosaga Episode 1 that I just went through that I don't think I need to go into too much detail, but I think I feel pretty good about it above that and above Xenosaga Episode 3. We're going to leave it at that. Very good. C tier. I think that's a pretty solid place for it. We got another game in C tier, which bothers me. Maybe we'll do a little reshuffling. I don't know. I don't know how much it actually really matters. So we'll see. All right. Sorry, we got a little poop emoji at the top there. It's weird because like now that I deleted the F row, like my framing's all messed up, but it's okay. We'll live. Now here, the Piece of Resistance, Future Connected. We're here to talk about it. If you don't know, for some reason, these other games I have not played through yet. I can talk a little bit about them just to kind of give you an update on the status of those for me, though. Xenoblade Chronicles 3, Future Connected, though. If you don't know for some reason, this game is downloadable content for Xenoblade Chronicles 3. It is not sold separately like Torn of the Golden Country. However, content-wise, it feels very much on par with Torn of the Golden Country. I think maybe the big difference between it and Torn of the Golden Country is that gameplay-wise, the fundamentals of Torna from like how you interact with that combat system was changed pretty significantly over Xenoblade Chronicles 2. They are very similar, and you can see how they're connected. Don't get me wrong. But there are some base level changes that Torna made that Future Redeemed does not make. Future Redeemed's base combat system feels pretty dang close to what Xenoblade Chronicles 3 was. So what the big difference is with Xenoblade Chronicles 3 Future Redeemed is the high-level combat system. Because if you remember correctly, my issue with Xenoblade Chronicles 3... Well, there's a lot of issues with Xenoblade Chronicles 3. However, the high-level tier of combat featuring the Ouroboros, I think, was underwhelming. In the way that I think mechs are underwhelming in almost every Xenosaga game, every Xeno game, with the exception of Xenoblade Chronicles X, I think mechs have an important role there from a lot of different perspectives. That's the best game that they've implemented mechs into. The rest of the games I don't think have been particularly effective when it's implemented from a gameplay perspective, excluding Super Robot Tyson, OG Saga, Endless Frontier, but that's kind of a different tier of mech. That's like a robot buddy, not something you're piloting actively in combat. So, what that means means. I don't know what that means. Oh, so the Unity combat system's like added on top of that, and like the Unity combat system's basically, in a lot of ways, it's a very simple system where you just pair up characters, and they have different buffs based off which characters you pair them with. And what you do is that you use that Unity combo when an enemy has been launched. And so one of the nice things about Future Redeemed is that very, very early on, they want you launching enemies. And so very early on, they give you the break, topple, launch combo right out the gate. You're ready to go almost from the start. There's like a brief period of time before you get your third party member that you don't have it. But once you get your third party member, you're good. You're there. Is that right? Who topples? Break? The mage topples. Okay, I need to make sure somebody toppled. I couldn't remember the combo. But yeah, very cool. Combat-wise, feels way better in my opinion in that regard. However, it is still kind of just Xenoblade Chronicles 3's combat system. However, given the length of the game and the novelty of the top-tier Unity combo system, I think it is very good. And for the length of this game, very substantial change for that time period. There's about maybe a 3 to 4 hour period at the beginning of that game. I did not feel good about its gameplay, but that was before the Unity combo was really introduced. Chain attack system has some changes here. I think they're interesting changes, but they still feel kind of like in the same way I feel like chain attack changes with Xenoblade Chronicles 2 was. Feels very nuts and bolts, not as a like fundamental change to how the chain attack system works. So I don't really have a lot of praise for that specifically. Map design is way better here from a mechanical gameplay perspective. There's just a lot going on. There's a lot of density of the maps. They are shrunk down to very good, manageable sizes, and there's a lot of layers to the map too. And then also on top of that, there is a way better mix of Xenoblade Chronicles 1 and Xenoblade Chronicles 2 areas. They take landmarks for those games, put them together in interesting ways, and I like that. Xenoblade Chronicles 3 did not really do that, despite it being kind of advertised as that. There's a couple scenes in that game you can probably catch if you really know what's going on. You can look at the Urian Mountains and be like, that looks like the Uriah thing in Xenoblade Chronicles 2. But this game feels like you are doing things where it's like, hey, I am at Prison Island while I'm also at that turtle country, snow, castle area kind of thing. And those things are mixed together and they feel mixed together, which is cool. Where this game doesn't have anything, and I think, or maybe it's not this wasn't in Xenoblade Chronicles 3 base game, so it's not an issue in that regard, but maybe when you're looking at something like Torn of the Golden Country in the original Xenoblade Chronicles, it's an issue. And I think there's a big argument, well, maybe not argument, but I think there's the question of, and I'm somebody who's always open to franchises evolving kind of thing, right? But does it matter that a Xenoblade environment have the context aspect to it? And what I mean by that is when you look at Xenoblade Chronicles 1 and how that game emphasizes the bodies that you're on, and then it shapes areas based off those bodies, and it's something you can feel in the environment. Xenoblade Chronicles 1 does a very good job of that. Torn of the Golden Country does a very good job of that. Xenoblade Chronicles 2 tries to do it, and I think fails, and I think Xenoblade Chronicles 3 does not even try. Maybe you can make an argument that everything's like a clock and it's like a ring, and so it's like a circle, so you can kind of feel where you're out in that circle. And I would give you that. I would give you that if you did that. Although I will say, area design wise, not very interesting, because every area just feels like it's like slightly tilted to the left, essentially, as you make a ring around the whole game. I don't think, for me personally, that's a cool aspect, and I think Xenoblade Chronicles 1 owns that aspect, and Torna, I think, kind of re-embraces that aspect to some extent. But I don't think, for me personally, that is a requirement of Xenogame. So while this game does not have that, and it's very noticeable that it does not have that, everything else changed about the area design is so much better and significantly better that I think it is just immensely improved. Story-wise, I think there's a lot of issues with... Well, let me put it this way. So we talked about Xenosaga Episode 1 earlier, right? And like the kind of him or 15 years ago kind of like dead-end sentences that they kind of expect you to hold on to for future reference, essentially, right? I think Xenosaga Xenoblade Chronicles 3 Future Redeemed has those scenes However, it is at the right point of the franchise, which is at the dead end of Xenoblade Chronicles, which is everyone who's on this journey, not everyone, but most people on this journey have played those video games. And so when you show them something and they say, if only they were here, you know what they're talking about. Most people know what they're talking about. I think that is a good time to do those scenes. I think those scenes could be handled better sometimes, though, in this game. I think Xenoblade Chronicles Future Redeemed sometimes has scenes where it will show you something and expects you to remember it from one of the games and remember why it's relevant in a way that I think for some people they won't catch on to unless they go back to the wiki later and reread it and be like, oh, yeah, that makes sense, right? That's not to say that's a bad thing to do per se, but the example I'm using right now, and it's hard to use it because it is, basically a complete spoiler for that. So it's like hard to use it with people publicly is, if you don't know, again, like, I don't know why you're listening to this if you haven't been spoiled on this yet. So if you are listening to this and you're worried about spoilers, stop listening now. Future Redeemed has a scene where basically they mention Xenosaga. And not in this way that, like, Xenosaga Episode 1 is released today. No. But there's a character named Dmitry Yuriev in the Xenosaga universe, and he's a fairly important guy. And it kind of puts him in a time and place that makes sense with Xenosaga, and they mention him existing in this world that Xenoblade Chronicles shows. In some ways, it's a virtual world, but it is a virtual world based off a real-world environment and a real place and time. And it also has some mentions to some Xenogears stuff, but the Dmitry Yuriev one is the big one. And also there's a Vector Industry logo on a radio, which is like a company in the Xenosaga universe, but that's kind of, whatever as well. For me, it's the Dmitry Yuriev thing. So the key thing with this scene is that you have this character, Nael, and she is explaining to you about how this world that this computer system is promising her is the perfect world. And it's kind of tacky in some ways where, like, she's explaining this, she's showing you this world, but at the same time, the radio's on and there's a news broadcast. And on that news broadcast, they're talking about human rights. And it's like the contrast is there, right? If you are playing that game knowing nothing about the previous Xenosaga games or whatever, like, the context is there. Human rights bills in Congress, not a perfect world, right? There are people who need representation, that are trying to get representation, or are not being treated fairly. And so there's people trying to get them treated fairly. Clearly not a perfect world if that's what's going on in the Congress right now, right? Or whatever government system they're doing. That tells the story there. That tells what's important about that scene there. But if you know who Dmitry Yuriev is, you know the human rights issues in the Xenosaga franchise, right? And that is an extra little spice on top. It's like, oh, Xenosaga fans, we see you. You know how messed up this guy is. You know how messed up this universe is when it comes to human rights and stuff like that, right? So you've got whoa, this gives me full context of what's happening in this scene, what's being argued about, who's human rights, right? And all that stuff. But the point of that scene is not to tell you that. The point of that scene is to say, this is not a perfect world, right? And it does that. It does that whether you know who Dmitry Yuriev is or not. And I think that is the perfect kind of scene you can have when it comes to, we want to reference a past game, but tell a story now. And I feel like Xenoblade Chronicles 3 doesn't do that all the time, if not most of the time. There's scenes where they're like, hey, remember Dumb Band? Okay. Like mentioning Dumb Band does not really matter that much. I think the point was to basically get to the point that, like, Fiora married Shulk essentially at some point. So he was like, Shulk was his brother-in-law or whatever. So I think that's like the point of that scene in a lot of ways. It's just kind of a weird scene in general. I don't know. I don't really care for that. And I don't really like how Rex at multiple points is like, if only they were here to Pyra and Mithra. like mentioning them, but they don't really do anything with that. There's also a scene where like what's his name? Matthew punches, and like you see inside of his glove, there's like the crystal for, I forget her name, Mononia, whatever the fused Mithra and Pyra. I always just call her Pythra because that was like in the dev files it was called Pythra or something like that. But like you see that, and like that scene, unless you know what's going on, is meaningless because everyone's like that light, but they don't like say what that light is or anything like that. Which they don't need to sit there and go that light, Pyra's light or Pythra's light, right? They don't necessarily need to do that, but I think they need to add more value to that scene beyond just remember that? Hey guys, remember that? kind of thing, right? So I think that's like my frustrations. But again, I think if you're going to do those scenes, perfect time to do that. End of the franchise, download content bonus time, right? Anyways, I think Matthew Nail's story as a whole, very strong. Basically tells the story of Noah, but in a different fashion, looking at siblings versus, yourself in a lot of ways. But I think it's strong in how they present it. I think the Xenoblade Chronicles 3 ties are smart, and I think they're a lot better than the Xenoblade Chronicles 1 and 2 ties, but I think generally it's a really solid story overall. And pacing-wise, I think the DLC is great. I think area-wise, everything's good. Content-wise, maybe a little too dense at times. It feels like you're kind of always doing something to the extent that, like, maybe it's maybe it's like emphasized by the fact there's like a beeping that happens nonstop when you're nearby something, and like there's almost always a beeping going on, I feel like, in that game. So, but it's like really good, really well put together otherwise. So I can very safely say I think this is a better experience than Xenoblade Chronicles 3. I think I can safely say this is a better experience than Somabringer. Super Robot Tyson Endless Frontier. I think I feel good putting it above Endless Frontier. My issue, Endless Frontier is a weird one because like combat wise is great. I love it. But the world and exploration and dungeons I think are maybe a little weaker in those games. I think. It's again, a lot of these games I played a long time ago, so like it's a very vague memory. I do love the characters. Hawken Browning is like an amazing womanizer. Maybe that's not the best way to put him. Very flirty man. I don't know. Maybe I would feel differently about that these days looking back at it. But like at the time, I was really into the character Hawken Browning. Good, funny writing. I think I feel pretty good about putting Xenoblade Chronicles Future Redeemed on top of that. Compared to Xenoblade Chronicles X. Oh, where are we at with Xenoblade Chronicles X? Cool world design. I think it's a better game. There's actually a lot of things about Future Redeemed and Xenoblade Chronicles X world design wise that I think are very similar in a lot of ways, but we'll leave that for another day. Pacing wise, I think Future Redeemed is a lot better than Chronicles X, but they're kind of different types of worlds, right? Like pacing in Xenoblade Chronicles X is kind of up to you, and it's kind of like you have to kind of pace yourself. And you can pace yourself the wrong way in that game. And the game is very, like, unforgiving in that regard because, like, you can get stuck in quests and things like that. Combat, I think Xenoblade Chronicles X's combat, there's a lot of similarities between X's combat and Xenoblade Chronicles Future Redeemed in terms of, like, kind of being the foundation being pretty similar, where it's like Xenoblade Chronicles X Foundation feels very Xenoblade Chronicles 1, but they kind of do interesting stuff on top of it. And kind of the same Future Redeemed, I feel like. Story-wise, I like the vibe of Chronicles X a lot. It's just kind of, and I think in some ways it's kind of novel because of that, because it is like a unique game story-wise in the Xenoblade Chronicles franchise. Let me see. If I put it up against Baten Kaitos Origins, do I feel good putting it above Baten Kaitos Origins? I don't think so. I think Baten Kaitos Origins combat system in Origins, not as good as the original Baten Kaitos, obviously, but there's a lot of cool things, cool areas in Baten Kaitos, even if a lot of them are reused from the original Baten Kaitos that I don't love. I like Sagi, I like Millie, I like Gilo. Yeah, I think pretty safe to say not above Baten Kaitos Origins. Let's go back to Xenoblade Chronicles X discussion. Oh, let's characters. Let's think about these characters. God, Fog is a good character. HB is a good character. Elma and Lin are alright. Tatsu, no Tatsu. I like Riku a lot better than Tatsu. Sorry to be on the Tatsu hate train. I do not like Tatsu or Tora. I like that Riku has like a more adult voice. I know that's like a localization change, but I like that they did that personally. I think having one like Manana being kind of the higher pitched one, I think is fine. Like I think it was better to do it that way. There's some really cool stuff that happens world design wise in Xenoblade Chronicles X in terms of like how they change scope and scale. Xenoblade Chronicles The Future Redeemed just doesn't have the time to do that because it's a shorter game. Story-wise, Xenoblade Chronicles X kind of ends on a cliffhanger. I don't have a problem with that, though. I think it's kind of interesting. I mean, the whole point about the ending of Xenoblade Chronicles X is, I think, just to kind of convey to you that something weird happened. They don't really go with it in any way. Like, they just kind of... I think maybe the intention was to do, like, DLC that kind of explored that stuff further, potentially. But they never quite got there. But, you know, Xenoblade Chronicles X kind of was cut short in a lot of ways. I think I prefer Xenoblade Chronicles X's storytelling overall. There are very different styles of storytelling, I will say. Xenoblade Chronicles X, I think, is more of a vibe game. Where, oh my gosh, I forgot the community stuff in Xenoblade Chronicles X is great. Xenoblade Chronicles X has maybe the most interesting community of all the Xenoblade Chronicles games. It's so fascinating to see how the alien races all interact with each other and kind of the struggles they all kind of come over to and like the how each different race has their own culture and like how you handle like different like kind of meaningless jobs but like in interesting ways because how that culture changes what it means to do that job, right? And then, like, you also get to see kind of the good side of the aliens and the bad side of the aliens and stuff like that, right? And you don't really get that kind of stuff as much in the base Xenoblade Chronicles games because just, like, there's not enough space, right? Xenoblade Chronicles X is a game of side quests, right? Yeah, I think I feel pretty good about saying it's not as good as Xenoblade Chronicles X, so I'm gonna, or at least not as high on my list. So I think we'll put it there. Let me just double check. Super Robot Tyson, Endless Frontier, Xseed. Is there anything I'm missing about that? Because I think the thing that kind of took it down for me was the dungeon design, right? And I don't have the greatest memory of it, unfortunately. I think the characters are fun. Combat's so cool in Endless Frontier, though. I do like it. I'm a little worried that I'm going to play Endless Frontier Xseed, and it's going to be mostly the same, and I'll be very disappointed. Because I would love to see that combat system evolve. Only thing I know about it, and maybe it's for the best, I only know this about it, Endless Frontier Xseed has the ability to do more in the defense phase, which is probably good. So, Hawken Browning's good. I do like Matthew. Hawken Browning's good. I think the problem with Endless Frontier is that Hawken Browning is good. I do not remember most of the other characters, though. There is, well, Reiji and Izomu are really fun. What a fun little pair. I forget, are they married? I can't remember. I feel like that's like a detail. Yeah, she has like a wedding dress in her move, right? Music's so good in Endless Frontier as well. Cannot remember a single bit of music in Xenoblade Chronicles 3 Future Connected, but base Xenoblade Chronicles 3 also similar. But I think music is a lot less important than the area design. I remember Xenoblade Chronicles or Super Robot Tyson Endless Frontier Xseed feeling like a slog at times when it came to going through dungeons and things like that. I wonder if I'd feel that way today as much. It's tight. I think I have more specific complaints about Super Robot Tyson OG Saga Endless Frontier, at least without revisiting it. I do not think I will do that anytime soon because I'd rather go and play Xseed at this time. So I think that's where we're going. Mid B tier? I think that's pretty solid. I mean, like, when you're thinking about it as a game that's a DLC add-on thing for Xenoblade Chronicles 3, like, it jumped up a tier, man. I really wish I could recommend future connected to people, or future redeemed to people who did not like 3 as much, but I do think you need to, well, it depends on what, like, if you beat 3, then I think you can just, like, you should definitely play Future Redeemed. It does suck that, like, if you didn't play Xenoblade Chronicles 1 or 2, you're not going to get quite the full story, and there's going to be a lot of stuff that I think will be kind of annoying from the storytelling perspective, more so than the base game. But like I said, this is the right time to do that stuff, so I'm not necessarily docking it for that specifically. But I do wish I could, like, recommend it more, though. I still feel pretty good about Torn of the Golden Country being, like, probably the best entry point for anybody who's curious about Xenoblade Chronicles, though. You know, especially if you are tight on time, hot 20-hour experience there, right? And there's some weird things you just need to keep in mind with it. But, you know, if you just want to kind of get a taste, like, what is the combat? What is the character? What is the tone of these games, right? I think Xenoblade Chronicles 2, Torn of the Golden Country is still the greatest entry point you can have there. Xenoblade Chronicles 1, I do worry sometimes that maybe Xenoblade Chronicles 1 doesn't hold up as well as my memory does. It's just been a long time. But in revisiting it, I felt pretty good about it. So let's not touch that. Baten Kaitos, beautiful. Hope you guys play the HD re-release if you haven't played that yet. I probably won't be, though. All right. Well, you know, I feel pretty good about that. We got a new list here. We deleted a tier. Maybe we'll reorganize some stuff later, but I feel pretty good about this layout here. Got an improvement on Xenosaga Episode 3. Xenosaga 1 dropped. Future Connected. I think probably lands at a good spot. I think that's probably a reasonable spot for Future Connected. I don't think too many people will have any qualms with that, unless you're looking at it from, like, a pure quality perspective. If you're somebody who's just like, the highest game on this list should have the highest Metacritic score, then I think that there's real problems on this list. But for a personal list, I think it's pretty good. Just to kind of do a little cleanup here before we wrap up, you know, at the bottom of the list here, we have our list of games that I have not played yet. So Project Cross Zone 2, somebody told me recently, story-wise, Project Cross Zone 2 is a big improvement over Project Cross Zone 1. That's interesting to know. Sounds like maybe gameplay and combat-wise, there's not that much. I do think maybe one thing I could do, I have a kind of a habit with strategy RPGs of sticking to the default settings, but if there are things to speed up that game speed-wise, and maybe it's in the base game, I just never really did it, so I got to go back and look maybe, that could also potentially give me a better experience, even if it is more or less the same base experience. So that was something that was kind of encouraging to hear about that. Dragon Ball Z Attack of the Titans, like we said before, it is kind of expensive now, so I won't be getting the US copy. I got the Japanese copy of the game. I'll just play the US version of it. I feel pretty good about that overall. Xenosaga Freaks, recently learned that, like, some of that's been fan translated. So there is potential that I could spend some time with Xenosaga Freaks. And then I need to kind of see what the scope of that game is as a whole, honestly, at some point. So Namco X Capcom, did not receive any specific information about Namco X Capcom, but in my mind, I kind of put it along the line of Project Cross Zone, where I was just like, I don't know how much I'll care about this. And it looks like in some ways it's kind of like a simpler version of Project Cross Zone. I was told recently somebody who I know who played Project Cross Zone and did not care for the combat, likes the combat in Namco X Capcom. He did not elaborate any further, so that's kind of promising as well. Xseed, I already kind of explained to you my concern with Xseed. Xenosaga 1 and 2 DS, no real updates there. You know, I did go and check just to make sure that the Xenosaga 1 and 2 DS fan translation had stalled out. As far as I can tell, seems like that is the case. So we'll see if that gets there. But, you know, we got a handful of games on this list here. I think I feel pretty good about saying that Dragon Ball Z Attack of the Saiyans will probably be the next Monolith Soft game I touch here. And then probably Endless Frontier Xseed. And I don't know from there. I feel like we should probably break up Namco X Capcom Project Cross Zone 2. I feel like Namco X Capcom's the more interesting game for me, probably. And then Xenosaga 1 and 2 DS is the most interesting game out of all these games, but the fact that it is locked to a Japanese game text right now is something that will be challenging. If you don't know, using machine translation with Nintendo DS text is not the greatest experience. I am doing something to try to see if it improve, like I can improve that process for myself. However, it is kind of complicated, so I got to figure out
how to do that. But, you know, or I could just learn some Japanese. Maybe by the time I finish up all these games, I will have learned some Japanese. So anyways, I feel pretty good about this list, though. I think we're pretty solid here. I feel pretty good about, you know, where Future Redeemed ended. I'm glad that experience turned out the way it did. I think it was a great game. I think you should try it out if you haven't played it yet. Again, if you've played Xenosaga 1, 2, and 3, not so big on the idea of you playing that without playing those 3 games first. I know that's hundreds of hours of homework for you if you want to do that. So again, if you don't want to do that homework, you just want to check out Xenoblade Chronicles, Torn of the Golden Country, or baseline Xenoblade Chronicles, I think are great experiences to start with. But yeah, I think that's going to be it. Thank you guys again for coming. Thank you so much. And then we'll see. Maybe we'll get another surprise announcements from Monolith Soft, and I'll be like, oh, now I got to rank another video game. But for now, I think it's going to be a little bit till I get to Dragon Ball Z Attack of the Saiyans. So I think I feel pretty good that this list is going to be quiet for a little while. So I hope you guys enjoyed it. Hope you had fun. And I hope you guys have a great however many months until we have a new Monolith Soft thing to rank or Monolith Soft actually put something out. All right. Bye.